Under crystal light and cigar haze, a child slid a rusted watch across white linen to Don Lorenzo Vescari. One look at the engraving and 20 years of control slipped. Outside, men with feathered hats tapped the door. Inside, the Don faced the one thing bullets can't kill: a promise. Who sent her here? Greco, fate, or a medic dying with secrets in his hands? If Vescari shelters her, he starts a war. If he refuses, he ends whatever's left of his soul. Tonight, the strongest man in Chicago must choose between a kingdom and a child. And only one of those can be saved. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe and share. Crystal sconces dripped light while men in black suits carved stakes and numbers. La Vita Nostra was a palace wrapped around a gun. Then the doors moved, just enough for a draft to smother cigar smoke, and a small shape slipped through as if the room might spit her out again. A little black girl stood there, ash on her knees, threadbare blouse under denim overalls, a single wet line cutting her cheek. She looked at the man at the table, the slicked hair, the three-piece suit, the faint tattoo at his neck, and whispered, "Please hide me." Chairs grated. Hands went to coats. Don Lorenzo Vescari rose, and the room learned what silence was. "From who?" he asked. "From the men outside," she said. "From their boss." "What's your name?" "Naomi." A lieutenant tried to steer her back out. She sidestepped him, went straight to the Don, and held out both hands. In her palm lay a dented pocket watch, brass worn to a dull heartbreak. "It's yours," she said. "He said you'd remember." Vescari saw the engraving around the rim. Anthony Vescari. His jaw set, then loosened. For the first time in 20 years, his men saw his eyes change. "Where did you get this?" His voice came quieter than it had any right to be. "From my father," Naomi said. "He told me to find you. His name? Samuel Carter." The name struck like a fist under the tablecloth. Older soldiers traded glances. Italy, rain, headlamps, a field clinic. "Who waits at the door?" Vescari asked. "Men in a blue Buick," she said. "One has a hat with a feather. They said if I ran again, they'd teach me something permanent." Anger folded itself behind the Don's face. "You came alone?" "I came with this." She lifted the watch, as if its ticking could be heard if everyone behaved. "He said you owed us a promise." A guard murmured, "Boss, smells like Greco." Vescari ignored him and gestured to a chair. "Sit. Eat. In my house, whoever asks for shelter gets bread and a chair." A waiter set a plate and water before the girl. She tore bread and didn't look at the knife. The Don studied the watch without touching it. "Why now?" "Why here?" "Because they're coming," she said. "Because he told me you would make them stop." "Who told you that?" "My father. He said you kept a promise made with blood and time." Outside, a horn called, short and impatient. Carlo Rossi, the underboss, said, "Let me move her to the kitchen." "No," Vescari said. "She stays where I can see her. And anyone who lifts a hand to a child in my house loses the hand." He turned back to Naomi. "What are you carrying besides that watch?" Naomi glanced at the portrait behind him. A young man smiling from a gold frame, Anthony. "I'm carrying his name," she said, "and something I don't know how to say." "Say what you can." "They killed my father 3 nights ago," she whispered. "He pressed this into my hand and said you would remember the field hospital. He said you would remember the boy you sent home." The Don stared at the watch as if it might answer for him. Through the window, the feathered hat drifted past in the streetlight. "Lock it," he told the doorman. Bolts slid. The restaurant became a vault. "Naomi," he said, "in this room you are under my protection." Relief flickered across her face. "Then hide me," she said. Please. He lifted the watch. The weight felt wrong and right at once. You brought back something I thought the ground had eaten, he said. Carlo shifted. Greco won't like this. Greco can add breathing to the list, Vescari said. He tucked the watch into his vest pocket and bent to Naomi's height. If men come through that door, they'll meet me first. But I need your truth, not your courage. Why are they hunting you? Naomi hesitated. If I tell you, you might send me away. I don't send away what reaches me, he said. I decide what's mine. The feathered hat slid past the window again. Because of what's inside the watch, she said at last. The room tightened. Vescari's hand closed over his pocket. All right, he said, reaching for the lamp. We open it together. The bulb hummed. Outside, the Buick idled. Vescari found the hairline seam his son cursed, worried it until the lid clicked. A faded photograph waited, Anthony and soldiers behind a medic's tent. Beneath it, the metal winked with a line he had never seen. A second compartment. Hold the light, he told Naomi. She steadied the lamp. He worked a penknife under the edge, pried until the panel loosened, and eased out a strip of dark film. Carlo leaned in. What is it? Evidence, Vescari said. Or a death sentence. Naomi asked, will it make them stop? It will make someone stop. Knuckles rapped at the door, 4 quick, 1 slow. The Greco knock. Guns appeared. Put the girl behind me, Vescari ordered. He slid the film back into the slot and closed the watch. The click sounded like a verdict. Boss, Carlo whispered, if you keep her, you start a war. If I give her up, Vescari said, I end whatever is left that resembles a man. He looked at Naomi. Keep your hands on the lamp and your eyes on me. That's how you hide in open rooms. She nodded once. The doorman called. They're insisting. Vescari straightened his cuffs. Open, he said. Slow. Men like to start the Vescari stories with gunfire. This one starts with a whisper, a watch, and the first honest decision he made after burying his son. What that decision cost, and why a medic's favor could empty a city's throne, belongs to a night years earlier, when a truck's headlights turned a field into a hospital and time took sides. That is where the truth began, and where we must go now. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive, and trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now, let's get back to it. The doorman slid the bolt and cracked the door just enough for cold air and a hat with a feather to slip into view. Carlo moved to intercept, murmuring through the gap with the easy menace of a man who could smile and end a life. Vescari didn't wait to hear the script. He touched 2 fingers to the maitre d's station, and the walnut panel beside it trembled open on a narrow service corridor. Lamp off, he told Naomi softly. Stay close. The girl tucked the pocket watch back into his palm. Her hand was small and hot with fear. They slipped through the panel as the restaurant's front door swung wider, and Carlo's voice rose into politeness, sharpened like a blade. Vescari guided Naomi down the corridor that smelled of lemon oil and steam, past racks of linen toward a second door hidden behind a framed wine list. He keyed it with a turn only the family knew, and ushered her into his private office. The office was all dark wood and older secrets. A crucifix the size of a man's hand. A photo of a young soldier with his arm slung around a medic outside a tent. Another of a boy on a pier, laughing with a fish that looked too big for the bucket. The desk, heavy and clearly lined, sat like a judge. He clicked on a shaded lamp. Gold touched her cheek. The track a tear had cut still faintly shining, and caught the faint tattoo at the base of his neck when he bent. "Sit," he said. She perched on the leather chair as though it might throw her. "Tell me your name." "Naomi," she said. "Naomi Carter." "Your father is Samuel?" "Yes." She swallowed. "He told me to say the name like a knock on a locked door." Vescari opened a lower drawer. No weapons, only a tin of pastilles, a small bottle of anise liquor, and a fresh handkerchief. He passed her the cloth. "You knock," I answer. "Why are you running, Naomi Carter?" "Because the men who took him said I was next." "Who took him?" "The ones from the blue Buick," she whispered. "The ones who say they work for Salvatore Greco." The old name slid across the room like a knife on marble. Vescari's mouth stayed even. His fingers whitened around the watch. "Tell me the story," he said. "Not the whole storm. Just the first lightning." Naomi looked at the photo of the boy with the fish. "He told me you had one once," she said. "A boy." He said his name like he was careful not to break it. "Anthony." Vescari did not blink. "My father said he patched Anthony up during the war," she continued, words arriving in little bursts. "He said the night was loud and the ground smelled like metal and rain. He said Anthony was bleeding and he could not stop it, but he did. And Anthony gave him his watch so he'd remember the time it happened. My father said the watch didn't keep time right, but it kept a promise." Vescari glanced toward the framed tent photograph. The medic's grin was lopsided and tired and familiar. He could taste that rain, hear a Jeep he no longer owned, see headlights like a confessional screen. "Your father saved my son," he said, and it tasted like penance. Naomi nodded. "He said Anthony said he would come back, and he did, but then he went away for good, and you changed after that." A small breath left the dawn, soundless, like a match dying. "Who told your father about me changing?" "He said he saw your eyes once from a car window when you didn't know he was there." "He said you looked like a man who was drowning on dry land." The lamp hummed. From the distant dining room came the clink of a glass, and Carlo's velvet laugh, still stalling then. Vescari set the watch on the blotter, thumb resting over the old engraving as if it needed warming. "3 nights ago," Naomi said, voice thinning. "We were walking home from the church basement because that's where the soup is hot and free. The Buick stopped. The man with the feather told my father to get in. He said he needed a doctor, and my father said he couldn't. Not anymore. He wouldn't. They hit him. He pushed me behind him. He kept saying, 'Run and find the man who owes us.' And then the one with the feather shot him twice and said, 'You're out of time, Doc.' He fell on me and put the watch in my hand. I ran." She clutched the handkerchief, not crying now, as if tears were a luxury that required safety first. "3 nights," Vescari repeated. His voice found the gravel under the silk. "And you came straight here?" "Not straight," she said. "I hid under a stoop until the street forgot my name. Then I followed the tall lights because he once said your place glows like a church with money." Vescari almost smiled. He didn't. The watch warmed under his thumb. "The night Anthony died," he said, as if confessing to a priest who had lost patience, "the watch disappeared. Docks, rain, a shipment that should have been clean. I told the boy I would walk the first 10 feet with him, and I didn't. He walked alone. He fell. After the bullets finished asking their questions, I couldn't find this watch. I thought the river took it. I told myself that was fair." Naomi's eyes moved from him to the photo of the pier. "My father said sometimes the river brings back what it wants you to face." Vescari let his palm leave the brass. "Did your father tell you what was inside the watch?" "Only that a promise was," she said, "and that if anyone opened it who didn't keep promises, it would be just a clock again." He breathed once, a slow, old thing. "A wise man." He was tired, Naomi said, but he wasn't done. The door clicked and Rossi slipped inside. He closed it with his heel, gold cufflink winking like a warning. "Boss," he said, nodding to Naomi as if she were a specter that had learned how to sit in a chair. "The Buick men say they saw a child come in here. They are willing to be rude about it." "And you?" Vescari asked, without looking away from the girl. "I am willing to be Rome about it," Rossi said. "But there's more. Greco's name is in their mouths like a blessing. If we keep her, we light the city." "We light it anyway," Vescari said. "Whether we see the match or not." Rossi's eyes flicked to the watch. "Boss, that girl's a message. Someone wants you off balance." Vescari considered the weight of old oaths, considered the night he had let his son walk into hard rain, considered the fact that he was not off balance. He was standing where he should have stood then. "You're not wrong," he said, "but sometimes the message is also a map." Rossi studied him. "You know what Greco will think. That your heart is a house he can rob." "He will find it occupied." Rossi's gaze softened by a fraction, then shuddered. "Do you want me to send them away?" "Politely," Vescari said. "Tell them the kitchen is closed. Tell them the table they think they have. They don't." Rossi nodded, then hesitated. "And the men?" "My men," Vescari said, finally letting steel into the room. "Do not mistake this child for leverage. Anyone treating her as such will be corrected." When they were alone again, Naomi's shoulders lowered half an inch. She watched him as if he were a bridge that might hold. He walked to the credenza and lifted a tray. The office held a private kitchen. Nothing large, just a warming cabinet and a gas ring for espresso. He set a small plate of sliced veal, a heel of bread, and a cut pear on the desk, then poured a glass of milk like a ritual. "Eat," he said. She reached as if each movement had to be earned. "Thank you." He loosened his tie one notch, the tattoo at his neck lifting like a shadow coming up for air. "Naomi Carter," he said, "you will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we find out who thought to make my ghosts walk again." She chewed, nodded, watched him watch the watch. "You asked if what was inside would make them stop," he said. "It might. It also might make them multiply. What's inside any promise does that." "Will you keep it?" she asked. "It kept me," he said, surprising himself with the plainness of it. "Now I try to keep it back." Footsteps went past outside the office, brisk, obedient. The Buick coughed in the street and withdrew like an insult that would be repeated later. "Finish," he told her gently, "then sleep on that couch." It belonged to a priest who forgot to leave. She smiled, small and quick. "Is he coming back?" "Not if my cook keeps winning cards." He picked up the phone on his desk and pressed a button that rang in the bones of the place. "Luca," he said when it clicked, "find me everything with a pulse on Samuel Carter. War records, clinic records, who burned him, who blessed him, where he bled, and where he made other men stop. And keep your ears between here and Greco's dockyard." Another button. "Kitchen," he said. "Send up soup, fresh bread, and fruit." "For a child?" "Yes, my office, and a blanket that doesn't insult the dead." He set the phone down and met Naomi's eyes. The fear wasn't gone, but it shared the room with something else now. "Listen to me," Vescari said, the voice he used for vows. "From this minute until I say otherwise, you are under my roof. That means two things. You eat before wolves eat you, and no one, no man, no badge, no angel with a pen, touches you without my say." She swallowed and nodded hard. "Yes, sir." He lifted the watch once more and slipped it back into his vest, close to where the heart he used to acknowledge still beat. The brass felt heavier than metal. Rossi cracked the door again, face unreadable. "Orders, boss?" Vescari didn't look away from the girl. "Yes," he said, voice calm and lethal. He spoke for the room, for the house, for the empire he might be about to set on fire. "No one touches the girl," he said. "Not until I know who she is." Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. By morning, the city outside La Vita Nostra had the gray look of smoke that hadn't decided whether to rise or fall. Vescari hadn't slept. The pocket watch sat open on his desk, ticking unevenly, sometimes ahead of itself, sometimes stalling, as if the past it carried were trying to catch up. Luca arrived at dawn, coat still damp from the river air. He was the family's listener, the man who could turn whispers into ledgers. He laid a folder on the desk without speaking. Vescari flipped it open. "Samuel Carter," Luca began. "Born Georgia, 1915. Army medic, Europe Theater, 43 to 45. Stationed near Naples, then Sicily. Decorated twice. The record ends early because he got himself blacklisted after the war." Vescari looked up. "Why?" "He was patching up civilians instead of soldiers." When orders came down to move out, he stayed behind in an Italian village hit by crossfire. Treated women, kids, anyone breathing. Command called it desertion, but the locals called it mercy. The Don's mouth twitched. "And mercy doesn't pay pensions." "No, boss." Luca pulled out a faded photo. A younger man in fatigues, sleeves rolled, laughing beside a tent. The medic from the photo in Vescari's office. After discharge, he moved to Chicago. No money, no license. Started tending wounds in the alleys of Little Italy and Bronzeville. Street doctor for whoever could find him. Broke noses, sewed them up again. Vescari closed the folder halfway. "And the war followed him." "It always does," Luca said. "About 5 years ago, Salvatore Greco heard about him. Needed a quiet pair of hands for his wounded men. Paid well at first, kept the cops out of it. Carter took the work, probably thinking it was better to heal than watch them bleed out on sidewalks. But the old man had lines even Greco couldn't cross. He flipped another page, a grainy newspaper photo of a burned building. This was his clinic. 2 years ago, Greco brought in a kid with a gut shot from one of your nightclubs. Carter refused to operate until the boy named who pulled the trigger. Greco didn't appreciate sermons. That same week, the clinic went up in flames. Vescari studied the image. The signboard warped, windows like sockets. Casualties? 2 junkies sleeping in the back. Carter and the girl made it out. After that, he vanished. Lived like smoke, always moving, never seen twice. Vescari's thumb rested on the folder edge. The girl said he was hiding. Now I know who from. "He didn't hide well enough," Luca said quietly. 3 nights ago, Greco's men spotted him near the church soup line. They wanted him back. One of Greco's nephews caught a bullet in a card game. The doc refused again. You know the rest. The Don exhaled through his teeth. "Greco kills the man who saved my son." "There's more," Luca said. He pushed across a page covered in typewritten notes. Before the fire, Carter filed a complaint with the city about counterfeit medicine shipments moving through Greco's warehouses. It vanished from the records. Somebody high up buried it. And this... He slid forward a carbon copy of a letter, signed S. Carter. He mailed this to a priest named Domenico at St. Anne's. It says, "If anything happens to me, deliver the watch to Lorenzo Vescari. He will understand the debt." Vescari read the line twice. The words swam. He was right. Luca hesitated. "You think he knew it would come to this?" He was a medic in war. They always know when the wound is mortal. They sat in the dim office, listening to the unsteady ticking. The Don poured 2 cups of espresso and didn't drink his. "What about Greco?" he asked. "Expanding south. using the police squeeze as cover. Half his lieutenants think you're weak after the docks incident last month. The other half think you're waiting to cut their throats. Either way, he wins. Vescari's gaze drifted to the couch where Naomi still slept, curled under a wool blanket far too big for her. She had eaten, and then folded herself small, as if the world might forget her if she took up less space. She said her father told her I owed him a favor big enough to buy her life, he murmured. Luca followed his eyes. And you believe that? I believe the ledger balances eventually. He set down the espresso, untouched. Anthony was 19 when he died. Samuel Carter was there when he lived. If the man pulled him out of the mud once, I owe him more than gold. Luca leaned forward. Boss, debts like that don't mix with business. Greco's men know she's breathing. They'll come to finish the cleanup. You keep the girl, they'll bring a war. Vescari smiled faintly. I've been at war since confession stopped working. He rose and crossed to the window. The street below shimmered with early rain. You'll keep listening, Luca. Find me where Greco hides his wounded, where he keeps his fear. Luca stood. You think the watch is worth something else? Vescari turned the object over in his palm. It's more than worth. It's proof. Men die for proof. The door creaked. Carlo Rossi entered without knocking, eyes sharp from a night of too much loyalty and too little sleep. Boss, reports from the street. 2 Buicks idling near the alley. Same feathers. They're scouting. Luca muttered. Didn't take them long. Vescari pocketed the watch. Let them circle. They'll learn this house bites. Carlo looked toward the couch. What about her? She stays. Boss, she's bait. Greco uses children and priests the same way, puts a soul in front of a bullet. Then maybe he should remember priests sometimes shoot back. Carlo folded his arms. If they storm this place, we can't hold it without spilling blood in your restaurant. Then I'll mop with regret later, Vescari said. The phone on the desk rang once, short, urgent. Luca answered, listened, and his expression turned to stone. He covered the mouthpiece. Word from the pier. Greco's men are moving west, not to the docks, to the avenue behind here. They're calling it a retrieval, not a hit. They think the girl's still in the open. Vescari's jaw flexed. Then they don't know who opened the door for her. He took his coat from the rack, draped it over the sleeping child. If they want her, they'll have to take me first. Boss, Luca said quietly, this isn't business anymore. No, Vescari said, watching the rain bead against the glass. It's an old promise collecting interest. He turned back to them. Luca, move the staff. No witnesses. Carlo, post men at every back street within 5 blocks. We catch whoever steps near that Buick. And if Greco himself shows? Carlo asked. Then I remind him who taught him how to load a gun. The 2 men left. The door closed, and for a moment only the irregular ticking filled the room. Vescari sat on the edge of the desk and looked at the girl again. She stirred, blinked awake. Did I dream it? She asked softly. No, he said. You're still here. She rubbed her eyes. I heard you talking. About my father. He nodded. He was braver than both of us put together. Naomi looked at the window, where dawn struggled through rain. He said you'd keep your promise. I am, Vescari said, even if it kills me. She frowned a little, the way children do when they're trying to read an adult's face. Then you're like him. He didn't answer. He reached for the watch and opened it again, watching the hands jerk forward and then pause, as if the clock were afraid of its own heartbeat. Downstairs, an engine revved. Tires hissed on wet stone. The men in the Buicks were not patient creatures. Vescari closed the watch, slid it back into his vest, and stood. Luca, he called through the door, voice steady now. "Tell my men the truth." "What truth, boss?" "That the debt's come due," Vescari said, "and we're the ones paying." Rain clung to the windows like breath on glass. Outside, Chicago had dissolved into a blur of wet lights and restless engines, but inside La Vita Nostra, silence was a blade's edge. The dawn had ordered the restaurant emptied. Only the ghosts of conversations and the faint ticking of the pocket watch remained. Naomi sat on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, while Vescari worked at his desk. He wasn't reading, not really, just staring at the same sheet of paper, the names and numbers smearing in his mind until they turned into faces he couldn't forget. Samuel Carter's file lay open, half-burned cigarette balanced in an ashtray, gone cold. He told himself he was waiting for Luca's next report, but truth was, he didn't want to look at the child sleeping in his office. Every time he did, something deep in his chest stirred, something he'd buried with his son. The watch ticked on the edge of the desk. Naomi watched it between blinks, hypnotized by its crooked rhythm. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. She slid from the couch and tiptoed forward, her small hand hovering above the brass case. She hesitated. Then she touched it. The metal was warm. Too warm. Like it had a pulse. She picked it up carefully, the way a child might hold a holy thing. The hinges squeaked softly as she turned it over. She ran a fingertip along the edge where a faint line split the casing. A secret seam. The moment she pressed it, the back popped open with a soft click. Something tiny dropped to the floor, a dark sliver, no larger than her fingernail. It landed near the desk leg. Naomi bent and picked it up. It wasn't part of the watch. It looked like a small film strip, wound tight and shining faintly under the lamp. "Mr. Vescari?" she whispered. The dawn turned, the sound snapping him out of his trance. His eyes caught the movement, the gleam between her fingers. "What did you do?" His voice wasn't angry, just careful. "I didn't break it," Naomi said quickly. "It just opened." This fell out. Vescari stood, walked around the desk, and knelt in front of her. He took the sliver between thumb and forefinger, squinting at it in the lamplight. A slow realization crept across his face. "Film," he murmured. "Microfilm." He rose and crossed to the cabinet near the wall, a relic from another time. From it, he pulled a small reader, one of those wartime devices long since forgotten. He loaded the strip and switched it on. The machine hummed. Then the images came alive on the wall. Naomi gasped softly. Photographs. Grainy, but unmistakable. A senator with his hand extended, taking an envelope thick with money. 2 uniformed police commissioners shaking hands with one of Greco's captains. A city councilman leaning across a poker table stacked with cash and heroin packets, stamped with Greco's crest. Each picture was time-stamped. Each face was clear. Vescari's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "Mother of God," he whispered. It wasn't just proof of corruption. It was a death sentence for half the city's power structure. He clicked through them one by one. Every image pulled him deeper into the machinery of betrayal. "This," he said finally, "is why your father died." Naomi looked up at him, eyes wide. "Because of pictures?" "Because of what they mean," he said. "These men, they keep this city breathing the way I keep my family breathing." Quiet deals, quiet money. This film, it's enough to make them choke on their own secrets. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the last photo, one that showed a man in a dark suit, only half lit, exchanging a handshake with a younger Greco. "Is that you?" she asked softly. Vescari froze. For a second he couldn't breathe. The side profile was unmistakable, himself 20 years younger, standing next to the man who now hunted this girl. The past staring back at him. He switched the machine off. The light died. "Sometimes," he said finally, voice low, "we help build the cages that end up holding us." He placed the film back on the desk and pressed his palms against it. "Your father wasn't just running from Greco. He was running from what this film could do to men like me." Naomi wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "Then why did he tell me to find you?" He met her eyes. "Because he believed I still had a soul." The words hung between them like smoke. Vescari poured himself a drink, then stopped halfway, set the glass down untouched. "He wanted me to choose," he said. "To do the one thing men like Greco never can. Tell the truth." Naomi walked closer, her bare feet silent on the rug. "Will you?" He looked at her. This child who had walked through hell to his door, her father's courage in smaller bones. "If I use this, Greco burns," he said. "But so do I. So does everyone under my name. What happens if you don't? Then Greco keeps his throne. And one day you die for nothing." He sat back in his chair. The watch lay open beside the drink, the film glinting beside it. Outside, thunder rolled low, close enough to rattle the glass. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and muttered, almost to himself, "You brought the storm to my table, little one." Naomi tilted her head. "Is that bad?" He smiled faintly. "It depends on who gets washed away." The room fell quiet again, save for the uneven ticking. Vescari turned the watch in his hand, the brass worn smooth where decades of guilt had rubbed it down. "You know what this means?" he said finally. "Your father didn't trust the police. Didn't trust anyone. He hid the only proof he had in the one thing he knew would outlive him. This watch." She nodded slowly. "He said time tells the truth if you let it." Vescari almost laughed. "Smart man." He stood and walked to the window. The rain had thickened into a curtain now, blurring the street below. A car idled across the road, long, black, 2 figures inside, unmoving. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. Vescari's voice hardened. "Greco's men," he said. "They're not leaving." He turned back to Naomi. "You stay inside this room, no matter what happens." Her chin trembled. "You're going to fight them, aren't you?" "I'm going to keep a promise," he said simply. He tucked the film inside the watch, snapped it shut, and slipped it back into his vest pocket. The old brass gleamed faintly under the lamp, a heart of metal keeping secrets too heavy for its size. He picked up the phone. "Luca," he said when the line clicked. "Bring me a camera, a safe envelope, and a name I can trust outside this city. I want this film copied and hidden before dawn." He hung up and looked once more at Naomi. She was watching him with that quiet, grave stillness children carry when they know the world is breaking around them. "You're not afraid, are you?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "My father said fear means you still have something left to lose." Vescari smiled, almost sadly. "Then we both have plenty." He sat back behind his desk, the rain hammering harder now, the ticking louder, uneven, stubborn, alive. Somewhere outside, the car engine cut off. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of iron and rain. The Don looked down at the watch again, the one object binding past, present, and debt. His voice dropped to a whisper only the walls could hear. "Time doesn't forget, Samuel," he said, "but maybe it forgives." He reached for the pistol under his desk, checked the chamber, then set it beside the watch. The 2 objects lay side by side, redemption and ruin, waiting for him to choose which one to use first. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky stayed the color of bruised steel, the kind of light that made the city look half dead and waiting for something worse. Inside La Vita Nostra, The silence was almost holy. No laughter, no glasses clinking, no piano drifting from the bar. Only the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the soft shuffle of men pretending not to watch their Don lose himself to thought. Vescari sat behind his desk, the pocket watch turning slowly in his fingers. The brass gleamed where it caught the light, concealing the truth it now carried. Naomi's secret, Samuel Carter's death, Greco's reach. The men who served him had noticed the change. Fewer orders, longer silences. He had always ruled with a steady hand and a voice that could freeze blood. Now there was a tremor under the calm, a hesitation that looked too close to mercy. And mercy, in their world, meant weakness. Carlo Rossi watched from the corner, jaw tight, cigarette burning low between his fingers. He had known Vescari since before the suits and the empire, back when they were just soldiers following bigger devils. He'd buried men for the Don, burned ledgers, and lied to priests on his behalf. But he'd never seen this, the great Lorenzo Vescari, distracted by a child. That night, when the others had gone, Carlo made his choice. He waited until the Don left for his evening meeting, a political dinner with a senator whose name appeared too many times in Greco's pockets. The Don had taken Luca with him, leaving the restaurant in Carlo's charge. The moment the Cadillac's headlights disappeared down the street, Carlo slipped into Vescari's office. The watch was gone. Vescari had taken it. But on the desk sat the folder marked Carter. The edges were frayed, the paper still smelling faintly of smoke. He flipped it open and stared at the photo of the little girl beside her father. Naomi Carter. The name alone made him feel something. Not sympathy, not pity, just dread. He closed the file and reached for the phone. The line to Greco's men was still active. Old habits die hard. "This is Rossi," he said quietly. "Tell your boss I'm ready to talk." Naomi sat in the study, legs swinging above the carpet, tracing shapes in the fogged window. She didn't know that outside. The world was shifting against her. That betrayal had already slipped into motion. Carlo entered a few minutes later, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You hungry, kid?" She nodded cautiously. He poured her a glass of milk from the small fridge and set it down beside her. "Boss'll be back soon. You'll like him better after meetings. He comes back with stories." Naomi tried to smile. "He told me he doesn't like stories that end sad." Carlo's throat tightened. He turned away. "Yeah, neither do I." He lit another cigarette, pretending not to notice the black car pulling up outside, the one he had told them to use. 2 blocks away, in a smoke-filled banquet hall, Vescari was shaking hands with men who smiled too much. The senator leaned close, whispering, "You're playing both sides too thin, Lorenzo. Word is, Greco's making moves you won't stop." The Don's face remained unreadable. "I stop men when they stand in front of me," he said. "Sometimes," the senator replied, swirling his drink, "they stand behind you." The words lingered like the smell of whiskey. Back at La Vita Nostra, the black car's doors opened in unison. 3 men stepped out, long coats, long faces, no hesitation. They walked in like regulars who had already paid. Carlo met them at the door, heart pounding. "You know the deal," he muttered. "No noise. No blood." The tallest man smirked. "That's up to her." They moved fast, through the hallway, past the wine racks, up the stairs. Naomi looked up from the window just as the door burst open. "Come with us, sweetheart," one said, his smile sharp. She froze, clutching the blanket. "Where's Mr. Vescari?" "He's waiting." She shook her head. "You're lying." Carlo's voice cracked behind them. "Do what they say, kid." "Don't fight." Her eyes filled with tears. "You said family protects family." Carlo couldn't answer. One of the men grabbed her arm. She kicked, screamed, tried to bite. They covered her mouth and dragged her through the hall, down the back stairs, out into the alley. By the time the Cadillac returned, La Vita Nostra was silent again. But not wholly this time. Just empty. Vescari stepped through the door and knew instantly something was wrong. The air was wrong. Too still. Too quiet. He called for Carlo. No answer. He called again. The office door was open. Inside, the lamp still burned, the chair overturned, one of Naomi's small shoes on the carpet. Then he saw it. The pocket watch lying in the center of the floor, cracked open, glass splintered like ice. The faint tick that had once filled the room was gone. He knelt slowly, picking it up. His thumb brushed over the dented surface. The film inside. Gone. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan and the rain starting again outside, tapping on the window like distant footsteps. On the desk, a small folded paper waited. He opened it. The handwriting was small, crooked, a child's scrawl. You said family protects family. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. For a long moment, he just stared at the words. Then he crushed the note in his fist and rose. Carlo entered behind him, trying to speak. "Boss, listen." Vescari turned. His eyes were no longer calm, no longer human. "Where is she?" Carlo swallowed. "They took her. Greco's men. I thought." "You thought." The Don's voice was quiet. Too quiet. "You thought you knew better than me." "Boss, I did it to protect you." "Protect me?" Vescari stepped forward, the cracked watch still in his hand. "You sold my house to wolves and call it protection?" Carlo backed toward the wall, the weight of what he'd done settling like lead. "She's just a kid. They said they'd take her, not hurt her. They just want the film. And you believed them." Vescari didn't shout. He didn't need to. He stepped close enough that Carlo could see the tremor in his hand. Not fear, but fury contained so tightly it was about to snap. "She was under my roof," he said, each word like a nail. "And you let them in." "Boss." Vescari hit him once, open-handed, but the sound cracked like thunder. Carlo fell, blood running from his lip. The Don stared down at him, then turned away. "Get out," he said, "before I remember how many graves I've dug for smaller sins." Carlo hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Vescari slipped the broken watch into his pocket, straightened his coat, and walked towards the door. "What I should have done the night my son died." Outside, the rain thickened again. The city, unaware, kept moving, horns blaring, lights flickering. But somewhere in the heart of Chicago, something old and terrible woke up again. The man the city once feared, the devil who built an empire from blood and silence, had come back. And this time, he wasn't building anything. He was coming to burn it all down. The first fire started before dawn. By noon, 3 more followed. Chicago's skyline was a rising lung of smoke, breathing vengeance into the gray morning. Warehouse roofs glowed orange, freight trucks burned like paper, and sirens screamed without pause. On every corner, someone whispered that Don Vescari had lost his mind, or that he'd finally found it. The city's underworld trembled. Greco's men were vanishing, some buried under collapsed docks, others turning up on train tracks with coins over their eyes. It wasn't business anymore. It was retribution. Vescari sat in the back of his car as it cut through the chaos. The cracked pocket watch ticked faintly in his hand, its glass replaced with a spiderweb of scars. The note, Naomi's handwriting, stayed folded inside his coat. "Boss," Luca said from the front seat, voice strained, "we've hit 6 of Greco's operations. You want us to keep going?" Vescari's eyes stayed on the smoke rising above the city. Every warehouse that carries his mark, every man who calls him friend, burn them. Luca hesitated. "That's half the South Docks." We'll lose suppliers. Even our people might. Then they weren't mine to begin with. The words were quiet, but final. The war had begun, and mercy was no longer part of its language. Across town, Naomi sat on a cold concrete floor, her knees pulled to her chest. The basement smelled of rust, oil, and fear. A single bulb swung overhead, creaking with each gust from the vent. She listened to the voices upstairs. Greco's men, loud and careless. "The feds will pay good money for this," one said. "Proof the city's rotten from the top down. Greco turns it in, he walks free." Another laughed. "And the kid?" "Collateral. Once the boss cuts the deal, she's gone. Can't have her running her mouth about where the film came from." Naomi closed her eyes. Her father's voice came back to her, soft but steady. "If the world turns dark, find the man who owes us." She whispered it to herself like a prayer, as if the words could summon him through the walls. At St. Anne's Cathedral, the pews were empty except for one figure kneeling at the altar. Father Domenico, old now, but still bearing the same tired dignity of men who've seen too much sin to be surprised by it. When the doors opened, he didn't need to look up. "I wondered when you'd come." Vescari's footsteps echoed softly against the stone. "You always did have good timing." The priest rose, turning to face him. "No, you always have bad reasons." Vescari smiled faintly. "I need information, Father. Confession comes first." "Confession doesn't change the ending." "Sometimes it changes the man," the priest said. Vescari paused. The watch ticked in his hand, faint but relentless. "There's a girl," he said. "They took her. I need to find where Greco's hiding her." Father Domenico sighed. "And if you do?" "You'll burn down what's left of the city. You'll kill him. You'll kill everything you once ruled." "She's just a child," Vescari said. "So was your son." The words cut clean. The priest stepped closer. "You can save your soul or your name, Lorenzo." "Not both." For a long time, Vescari said nothing. Then he placed a thick envelope on the altar. Greco's confession from years past, signed and sealed, an insurance policy that had never been used. "I already buried my name," he said. "Now I'm saving hers." Father Domenico looked at him with something between sorrow and pride. "Then God help you. Because the streets won't." By midnight, the city bled fire. Greco's clubs lay in ruins, his smugglers dead or fled. The air smelled of gasoline and vengeance. Luca's men, what was left of them, moved like shadows, torching everything bearing Greco's insignia. But vengeance had a cost. Vescari stood on a pier watching a warehouse collapse into itself, flames licking the sky. The reflection in the water looked like a funeral pyre for the whole city. Luca approached, coat torn, soot on his face. "Word is Greco moved the girl 2 nights ago. He's using her as leverage. Says he'll trade her to the feds for protection." Vescari's jaw tightened. "And the film?" "They've copied it. It's moving through a courier named Matteo Ricci. He's supposed to deliver it at dawn." The Don turned to him. "Where?" "Greco's compound, the old steel warehouse near the river." Vescari nodded slowly. "Then that's where this ends." Luca frowned. "Boss, you can't go alone." "I'm not going as a boss." He slipped the watch into his pocket. "I'm going as a father who owes a debt." Luca grabbed his arm. "You go in there and it's suicide." Vescari looked at him, eyes cold but alive in a way they hadn't been in years. "Then let them write my obituary in fire." In the basement, Naomi stirred awake at the sound of thunder outside. No, not thunder, explosions. The men upstairs began shouting. "They hit the docks," one yelled. "He's coming for us." Naomi crawled closer to the door, her fingers brushing the cracks in the wood. She could hear the chaos, engines starting, guns loading, panic replacing arrogance. She whispered to herself, "He found me." The bulb flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Footsteps thundered overhead, then gunfire. Sharp, fast, close. Someone screamed. The building trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling, catching the faint glow of flames through the cracks. She pressed her hands to her ears and kept whispering, "He found me. He found me." Vescari's car screeched to a halt outside Greco's steel fortress. Rain returned in sheets, cutting through the flames and the smoke. His men were gone, scattered or dead. He was alone. He stepped out, trench coat soaked, pistol drawn. The watch ticked faintly against his chest, the rhythm of borrowed time. Every shot fired that night would later be remembered, by the police who arrived too late, by the witnesses who swore they saw a ghost walking through fire. But for now, there was only one truth. Lorenzo Vescari wasn't fighting for control anymore. He was fighting to keep a promise. As he entered the building, the smell of blood and fuel filled the air. The walls shook with distant detonations. He moved through it like a man unafraid of hell, maybe because he'd already been living in it. Behind him, the city burned brighter. Somewhere inside that inferno, a girl prayed. And for the first time in his life, a monster listened. By dawn, Chicago was silent again. The fires had eaten their fill. Reporters would call it a gang war. The police would call it retaliation. The papers would name it the night the old city died. But in truth, it was a baptism, a sinner's soul washed clean in gasoline and rain. And at the center of it, walking through the smoke with the watch ticking like a heartbeat in his pocket, was Don Lorenzo Vescari, no longer a king of crime, but a man reborn through ruin, chasing one last fragment of redemption through the ashes of his own empire. The warehouse squatted at the edge of the docks like a dying beast, rusted ribs of iron, windows shattered, the smell of oil and salt bleeding through the air. Inside, the lights hung low, casting broken halos across the concrete. Chains creaked with the rhythm of the wind. Naomi sat tied to a chair in the center of it all, wrists raw, breath shallow. The ropes cut deeper every time she moved, but she didn't cry anymore. Not after hours of waiting. Not after hearing the laughter of men who didn't believe help would ever come. Salvatore Greco stood a few feet away, hands buried in his pockets, cigar glowing faintly. His eyes glimmered with the kind of calm that only comes from believing you've already won. "You know," he said, pacing slowly around her, "your father wasn't half the man everyone said he was. Brave, maybe. Stupid, definitely." He crouched until his face was level with hers. He begged before he died. "You want to know what he said?" Naomi's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Greco smiled. He said, "Please, not in front of my daughter." His hand gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "He died protecting that damn watch." "You think that makes him noble? It makes him weak." Naomi's tears welled, but her voice came out small and fierce. "You'll die like he did." Afraid. Greco laughed, pushing himself upright. "Fears for men with consciences, little girl. Me? I'm just practical." He turned away, flicking ash onto the floor. "Your Don won't come. He's smart enough to know what happens to martyrs in my city." Outside, thunder rolled, low, steady, unhurried. One of Greco's men glanced toward the window. "Boss, headlights." Greco frowned. "How many?" "Just one car." The thunder grew louder. Closer. Then came the sound of an engine idling, deep and rough. "Open the doors," Greco said, lighting another cigar. "Let's welcome our guest." The heavy metal doors groaned apart, revealing rain pouring in sheets. A single black Cadillac sat at the edge of the dock, headlights cutting through the downpour like knives. The engine cut. Silence followed. Then the door opened. Lorenzo Vescari stepped out, coat plastered to his shoulders, his face unreadable. No guards, no backup. Just him, and the watch glinting faintly under his collar. Greco's men shifted nervously, guns half raised. "You've got some nerve showing up here alone," Greco called out. "You planning to talk me to death?" Vescari kept walking. Rain slid off his brim, dripping down the lines of his face. Each step echoed, steady, measured, inevitable. When the first bullet cracked through the air, he didn't flinch. He drew faster than they expected. One man dropped, then another. Each shot was clean, deliberate, the precision of a man who'd spent his life trading sins for survival. By the time the echo faded, 4 men were down. The 5th stumbled backward, screaming for cover. Greco stepped out from behind a crate, clapping slowly. "Bravo, Don Lorenzo. Still got the touch." Vescari stopped 5 paces away, gun raised. "Where's the girl?" Greco smiled. "Safe." For now, he gestured toward the shadows. Naomi's voice broke through the dark. "Mr. Vescari." The Don's eyes flicked toward her, just for a heartbeat. And that heartbeat was enough. Greco fired. The bullet tore past Vescari's shoulder, grazing flesh. He didn't stumble. He didn't blink. He fired back. The shot hit Greco's cigar, shattering it against his cheek. "Still quick," Greco muttered, wiping ash and blood from his face. "But slower than you used to be." He circled closer. "You could have stayed king of this city. You had power, money, loyalty, and you gave it all up, for a kid who isn't even yours." Vescari's voice was calm, almost quiet. "I already lost one." Greco's smirk faltered. Vescari fired again. The bullet clipped Greco's hand, sending his gun spinning across the floor. Greco lunged. The 2 men collided, slamming into crates, splintering wood and spilling rusted nails across the floor. They grappled, old lions fighting not for victory but for meaning. Greco's fist cracked against Vescari's jaw. The Don stumbled, spat blood, then drove his elbow into Greco's ribs. The sound was sickening. Naomi struggled against the ropes, shouting, "Stop it, please!" Vescari twisted, knocking Greco to the ground. He pressed the barrel of his gun to the man's chest. "You killed a medic who saved my son. You hunted his daughter. You thought that made you strong." Greco coughed blood and laughed. "You think killing me makes you clean?" Vescari leaned closer. Rain dripped from his hair onto Greco's face. "No," he said softly. "It makes me finished." Greco's eyes flickered to something behind the Don. His hand shot up, revealing a small pistol from his sleeve. Naomi screamed. The gun fired. Vescari turned instinctively, stepped between the bullet and the girl. The shot slammed into his side. The sound wasn't loud, just final. He staggered but didn't fall. His body shielded her as another shot rang out. This time he fired back, point blank. The bullet hit Greco square in the chest. The rival boss crumpled backward, a look of disbelief frozen on his face. The cigar rolled from his hand, still burning, until it landed in a puddle of spilled fuel. Flames bloomed instantly. They spread fast, up the crates, across the floor, licking at the walls like hungry tongues. Vescari dropped to one knee, clutching his wound. Naomi crawled free of the ropes and ran to him, tears cutting clean tracks down her soot-streaked face. "Mr. Vescari!" He pressed a trembling hand to her cheek. "You're safe now." "We have to go," she said, voice breaking. "Please, you're hurt." The fire roared louder, the ceiling beginning to groan and buckle. Vescari looked at the spreading flames, at Greco's motionless body. "Your father died protecting you," he whispered. "He passed the debt to me." "I've paid it," She shook her head fiercely. "No, you saved me. Now let me save you." He smiled faintly. "You sound just like him." She grabbed his arm and helped him up, the two of them stumbling through smoke and heat. Behind them, fuel drums exploded, shaking the ground. Shards of light and flame filled the air. Naomi dragged him toward the exit, her small body straining under his weight. The rain outside hissed as it met the fire, turning the night into steam and thunder. They burst through the doors just as the warehouse erupted behind them, a wall of orange swallowing everything it touched. Naomi pulled Vescari behind a concrete barrier, coughing, crying, clinging to him as flaming debris fell around them. He was fading fast, blood seeping through his coat. She pressed her hands to the wound, desperate. "Don't close your eyes," she cried. "Please, don't." His fingers brushed hers weakly. The watch hung from his pocket, cracked glass reflecting the fire's glow. He looked at her one last time, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell your father. The debt's paid in full." Then his hand fell still. The watch ticked once, then stopped. Behind them, the inferno devoured the last of the empire. Naomi held him as rain poured down, washing soot and blood into the harbor, carrying away the sins of a man who had finally learned what it meant to protect something worth dying for. Rain followed them back to La Vita Nostra. The sky was still burning behind them, the reflection of the warehouse fire trembling across the puddles in the street. The Cadillac's tires hissed on the wet cobblestones as Naomi guided it through the empty avenues, her small hands gripping the wheel like she could hold the world together by will alone. Vescari lay slumped in the back seat, his coat soaked dark with blood. Every breath came slower, every exhale softer. Yet his eyes stayed open, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red, as if the whole of Chicago were dissolving before him. When they reached the restaurant, it was past midnight. The doors, once guarded and grand, hung open now. His men waited in silence, faces pale under the chandeliers. Smoke still clung to the dawn like a shadow. Naomi helped him out of the car, her hands trembling as she led him through the entrance that once echoed with laughter, deals, and sin. He looked around, the marble floor, the portraits, the wine bottles lined like trophies, and smiled faintly. "Everything dies cleaner than men do," he murmured. They carried him to his office, laying him gently in the leather chair behind his desk, the same desk where a lifetime of orders had been given. Luca stood near the doorway, hat in hand, eyes glistening. "Boss, we got medics on the way." Vescari shook his head weakly. "No medics. No priests. Just my family." The room filled with the weight of silence. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. He motioned toward the safe in the wall. "Take the ledgers. All of them. Burn them. Every debt, every secret, every sin tied to my name, gone before dawn." "Boss," Luca whispered, "those books are worth millions." "Then they're worth more as ashes." One of the younger men stepped forward, tears streaking his soot-stained face. "Don, what about the family? What happens to us?" Vescari's gaze softened. "There is no family," he said. "Not anymore. The Vescari name ends tonight." He coughed, blood staining his collar, but his tone never wavered. "If the world remembers me, let it remember the man who finally did one good thing." The men looked at each other, hardened soldiers who'd bled for him, now blinking like lost children. Slowly, they began to move, gathering the ledgers, the papers, the money, piling them in the center of the room. Naomi stood by his chair, clutching the broken watch in both hands. The crack across its glass caught the lamplight like a scar. She looked up at him through tears. "It's still not ticking," she whispered. Vescari smiled faintly. Then maybe it's waiting for permission. She didn't understand, but she held it tighter. He reached out a trembling hand. Come here, Bambina. She stepped closer, her small fingers finding his. His skin was cold, yet his grip was steady. Hide it, he whispered. Keep it safe. Start over. Her chin quivered. I don't know how. Yes, you do. His thumb brushed her cheek, leaving a smear of blood like a fading blessing. You'll live honest. You'll grow kind. You'll remember nothing of me that would make you afraid. That's how. The room smelled of rain, ink, and smoke. Luca struck a match and dropped it into the pile of ledgers. Flames bloomed slowly, licking at the paper, curling the edges of an empire. Vescari watched it burn. All the names, all the numbers, all the ghosts. Do you hear that? He murmured. Naomi tilted her head. What? Silence, he said. The first real peace this place has ever had. The fire's reflection danced in his fading eyes. Outside, the first sirens began to rise, faint, distant, coming closer. The men shifted uneasily. Cops'll be here in minutes, one said. We gotta go, boss. Vescari didn't answer. His breathing was shallow now, each inhale a mountain. Naomi knelt beside him, clutching his hand with both of hers. Please, she whispered, stay awake. His lips twitched in something like a smile. I've been awake too long, little one. His gaze drifted to the window, where lightning flickered over the harbor. For a brief moment, he saw them both, his son Anthony, laughing under an Italian sky, and Samuel Carter, saluting with that calm, knowing smile. The sound of rain grew louder. The flames hissed in the corner. Naomi bent over his hand, sobbing silently. Please don't leave me, she said. He looked at her, this small, trembling girl who had somehow dragged his soul out of hell, and whispered, You already saved me. Then, somewhere in the stillness between his last breath and the next thunderclap, the watch in her palm began to tick. Softly at first, then louder. Tick, tick, tick. The sound filled the office, echoing through the empty halls like a heartbeat reborn. The men froze. Luca turned slowly toward the noise, eyes wide. Boss, he whispered, but Vescari's eyes were already closed. Naomi pressed the watch to her chest, tears streaming freely. Outside, red and blue lights flashed against the rain-soaked glass. Sirens wailed closer, filling the night with urgency, but inside, the world had already gone quiet. Naomi stood, the watch still ticking in her hand. She looked at Vescari's face, peaceful now, the lines of power and guilt finally gone. She leaned close and whispered, I'll hide you too. Then she turned to Luca. They'll come for me. He nodded slowly. I'll make sure they don't find you. The girl looked one last time at the dawn, her savior, her debt, her promise. Then she tucked the watch into her pocket, slipped out through the kitchen door, and disappeared into the rain. By the time the police burst through the front entrance, the fire had spread through the office. Papers burned, portraits melted, the Vescari name turning to smoke. The city's most feared man died not as a king, but as a father, redeemed by a promise, and remembered only by the small sound of time beginning again. And somewhere in the storm, a little girl walked alone through the wet streets of Chicago, clutching a broken watch that refused to stay silent. The cemetery was quiet, except for the wind brushing through the winter grass. The city loomed faintly in the distance, its skyline softened by fog. A ghost made of steel and memory. Naomi stood alone at the top of the hill, gloved hands clasped around something small and golden. The grave was simple, No marble angels, no ornate carvings, just a headstone with an inscription that caught the morning light: Don Lorenzo Vescari. Father, sinner, protector. A thin veil of frost traced the letters. Naomi brushed it away gently, as though clearing dust from a photograph. The years had been kind to her face, but not her eyes. They carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. From her coat pocket, she took out the pocket watch, no longer cracked, no longer silent. Its brass gleamed in the pale sun, and its steady ticking filled the empty air like a heartbeat the earth had refused to bury. She knelt before the grave. "I kept it safe," she whispered. Her breath fogged the air. "You told me to start over. I tried." The world around her faded as the memory returned. The night she left La Vita Nostra, soaked to the bone, clutching the watch in her small hands. She remembered how Luca had hidden her in the back of a bakery across the river, how she'd watched from an attic window as police sirens bathed the city in red and blue. They'd called it the end of an empire. The papers said Vescari died resisting arrest. The police called it justice. But Naomi knew the truth. He hadn't resisted anyone. He'd just stopped running. Weeks later, when the chaos cooled, she'd found the microfilm sealed inside a pouch that Luca slipped to her before he disappeared. He wanted this to mean something, he'd told her. And it did. Naomi never took it to the police, never spoke to the press. Instead, she slipped it into a plain envelope with no return address and sent it to the city's biggest newspaper. Inside, she wrote just one line: "Time tells the truth if you let it." 3 days later, the front page exploded with names: senators, police chiefs, judges, all exposed. The empire of corruption Vescari had once helped build collapsed overnight. Investigations spread like wildfire. Some men went to prison, some fled the country, and others simply disappeared. And through it all, not one person ever mentioned his name. Naomi had made sure of that. She ran until she found peace, another city, another name, a quiet life among people who never asked why a young girl flinched at thunder. But she never let go of the watch. She learned how to repair it herself, carefully replacing the shattered glass, resetting the gears until it ticked again, a rhythm of survival, not sorrow. Now, years later, the ticking still soothed her. She placed it gently on the headstone. "You were right," she said softly. "Family protects family." Her voice trembled. "You weren't my blood, but you kept your promise. And I never broke mine." A faint gust lifted her hair, carrying the smell of rain and earth. Somewhere down the hill, a car horn honked. Distant, familiar, the kind of sound that used to mean danger. Now it was just life continuing. Naomi smiled faintly. "You'd like the city now," she murmured. "It's cleaner. Quieter. The men who thought they owned it are gone. It's not perfect, but it's alive." She looked down at the watch again. The second hand moved smoothly, no hesitation, no broken beats. It reminded her of two men whose hearts had stopped for her sake, one who gave her life, and one who gave his to protect it. In the rhythm of that ticking, she could still hear them both. Anthony's laughter, Vescari's final words, two ghosts sharing one heartbeat. She tucked the watch back into her coat and rose. The wind whispered through the branches like an old lullaby. As she turned to leave, a flashback flickered through her mind. The last night she saw him alive. His hand on hers, the faint smell of smoke and rain, his whisper, "If the world remembers me, let it remember the man who finally did one good thing." She stopped at the edge of the path, looking back once more. "It does," she said under her breath, "even if it doesn't know it." The city lights blinked faintly through the fog, soft, gold, eternal. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of jazz floated through the air, carried from a bar on the next street. The melody wrapped around her like a memory, smooth, melancholic, endless. Naomi pulled her coat tighter and started walking down the hill. The watch ticked in her pocket, steady as a promise kept. Behind her, the grave stood in the fading light, the name Don Lorenzo Vescari etched in stone, the mark of a man who had once ruled through fear, then died for love. The wind brushed across the headstone, turning its whisper into something almost human. For a fleeting second, it sounded like a sigh, a ghost exhaling peace. Naomi didn't turn around. She didn't have to. The city slept on, unaware that one of its darkest monsters had once saved its smallest light. And as the first stars broke through the fog, the watch kept ticking, echoing the hearts of the dead, the mercy of the living, and the truth that time, after all, can forgive what men cannot.